Hi everyone, if you're watching a recording, do fast forward here just another minute. We're just about ready to start. It looks like we are up and running on several channels. I wonder, since I have another minute, I wonder if I can get this up on Twitter. Let's see. Always an adventure, trying to make things more interesting. See if we can expand our breadth a little bit. Not that we do much on Twitter except rant. So, if you ever want to see one of my rantings, go ahead and get on Twitter. Okay. Okay. Andy says Twitch is up and running, which is great. And let's see if I can. Oh, it shows connected. Huh, sort of funny, but I don't see anything. Whatever. There we go. It's actually working. All right. Twitter's up. Hey. Okay, so it's 1 o'clock. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Q Farm Gray. Today is Monday, March 21st, which means spring has officially started, and it's beautiful outside. The flowers are starting to come up. The birds are tweeting. I know. It's great. How exciting. I know. For those of us who live in the Northeast, this is a big deal for us because... Okay, so ooh, 1 o'clock. Wait. Oh, no, I got to turn off my speaker. You guys can hear that, don't you? Okay. Anyway, so for those of us who live in the Northeast, this is a big deal. Seeing the sunshine, the birds out, and the flowers growing, that means it's going to be past the winter. Well, I say that. We have seen snow in May. It's really wackadoo, but we have seen snow. Anyway, today is Monday, and we are going to start something new. We've done this a couple of weeks now. We skipped last week because Deb Perry was here last week for a guest instructor spot, but we are continuing with castellated bezels. Let me give a little bit of background on this before I get started. So start something new is a concept of me literally jumping into something I have never ever done before, and going through the process of what it takes to do this. There has been a few comments about, well, why didn't you look up the video or look up YouTube or do a little bit more research? Well, what's the point of doing it raw and unedited? And there's no point of doing that if you're going to look it up and have it all nice and tight. I know it's not a pretty process, but it's also to show that this is what the process is all about, and hopefully we learn something along the way. So I'm going to recap where we were a couple of weeks ago when we jumped into this. I was presented with a couple of castellated bezel tools that were sent to me to sort of play with. And this was the Bezel Ease, and that was sent to me. And then a friend of mine sent me Bezel Jaws? Anyway, and I decided that I would just test both of them and see where they would go, having never made a castellated bezel. So your choices are, there's these two tools on the market, but you can also do it manually by sitting there and scoring your metal. So what happened in the demo a couple of weeks ago is I learned a few things. Going into it, I had made certain assumptions that things should work a certain way, which I discovered, if you go back and watch, which I discovered it doesn't quite work the way I thought it was supposed to work. And pretty much what we discovered was that this tool was the easier tool. But what was sort of fun about what happened a couple weeks ago is that Robert Lopez, a lot of you guys know him, he is a recognized instructor. He's out there in California. He just happened to be on Facebook, and he caught me live and jumped in on this live. And I really want to just, A, give Robert a shout out and say thank you for doing that, and B, back him up, because, okay, here's how it went. I also got commentary, and people have reached out to me and say, was that supposed to be, was Robert like scheduled to be there? Should he have made all those comments? The answer is no. It just happenstance that he came on. And yes, it was great that he was there because we all learned a lot from it, because he's made so many of these bezels and he had so much input that it was nice to have this to bounce off, which is really tough for someone like me. I work in my studio by myself, and I feel like I work in a freaking vacuum. That said, you know, I never have anyone that I can talk to. I mean, unless I pick up the phone and call, I basically don't have anyone I can talk to say, hey, you know, what about this or what about that? And having Robert there to comment on it just was really helpful, so that I can get some feedback as to what I was doing right or wrong or could be doing better. But what's even more interesting about this story is that later on that day, Robert and I got on the phone and talked. And it's really interesting, but we pretty much came up with the same problems in the tools and how it could be done better. So for a person who's never done it before, and for a person who has been doing it for years, to come up with the same resolution, I think we win. Anyway, that said, Robert also came up with a low-tech approach to a tool, and I'm going to test it again, totally raw. I haven't tried it or anything, but what he suggested made a lot of sense. And so I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second. In the meantime, I sort of again want to recap these tools because since then I did look up the YouTubes to see maybe I am doing this wrong. Maybe it's a wrong approach, right, to understanding this, and just again trying to do this a little bit better. Okay, so here we have Jim Brandvik's tool, right? He had two pieces like so. One, it says bez jaws, the other one says top jaws. So this bez jaws is to cut the bezel. And what you do with this is you take your bezel, here's just some copper, and can you see, let's see, yeah, can you see the notch there? This, if you put it in a vise and squeeze it, it becomes a ledge. And you see, it holds it really tight and across the top. And then you would saw, oops, maybe better if I use a smaller one. Okay. And then you would saw those teeth marks across the top, and he has a tool that you can use to what am I thinking? Not mark, but to give you the right, oh my gosh, to divide it out evenly. Okay, so that's what that was. And then after you do that, and you put this on your vise, after you do that, well, what about the scoring lines that you're supposed to make from those cuts? You would actually put it, oh, I put it in the wrong one. That's why it wasn't working. Ha 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 ha. This is the top jaws. The other one's the bez jaws. Okay, so there it is. So there. That's much better. Then you put it into the bez jaws, which is wider. And look, it fits right in here, and it does stretch open, right? And you put this right in here, like so. Can you see that? It fits right in. And then you put this in a vise, okay? And then you would just saw across. It holds your bezel really nice, and you would just saw across to create those scores. Now, the reason why I'm not doing this is because this was loaned to me. And when you go to make those score marks, you are indeed going to be cutting into the your clamp. What are we calling this? Your gadget? Your vise. Anyway, so you will be scoring into the vise. And again, it's not my tool, so I don't want to do that. But that's how you would use this. Is it practical? I'm going to give this like a 7 out of 10. I don't love it. I don't love that I'm cutting into my tool, especially one that I paid $100 for, because I'm not completely clear how many times I can do that without completely like botching this whole thing up and wanting to buy another one. So that's sort of, I don't know. Okay, so there's that one. Then we're going to go back to this one. Okay, so this is the Why can I never remember? Okay, the bezel ease. And this one, if you recall, came with two shims, one 16 gauge, one 20 gauge. And since I'm using 18 gauge bezel, I'm going to keep to the 20 gauge because of course it would work. This one came with two different sizes, or I'm sorry, widths, as far as how wide you can make those teeth. Okay, and another thing too is if you're really looking, you'll see, oops, the shim, the way it works is one is taller, one is shorter, and you can flip it around to do it like this. Now, our bone of contention on this one was that it was too limiting. That was the big problem. That was one, because if you were to use, let me put this in here properly so I can actually show you. Here we go. Okay, so if you were to use this one side where you can see how wide that bezel is, how do you get this in here? Because if you slip in your bezel, actually I'll use the copper one so you can see that better. If you slip in the bezel like so, you'll see, you know what, I'm being lazy. Let me just tighten that up. You'll see there's a small problem with this. Okay. If you slip in your bezel, you can see that it's too low. It's below the cut mark. If I cut to their mark, I will never reach my bezel. So you would have to have a really, really thick bezel like this, or tall bezel, to be able to use this, to cut it all the way down. That's one. Two is the reverse. So what if we use the shorter side? If we use the shorter side, well, it's appropriate, sort of, for the shorter bezel, but it is too short because this is sitting on top. My demo, because I didn't read the instructions until today, my demo, what I did a couple weeks ago was I had my piece sitting on top and I sawed all the way down to their groove. But according to their instructions, the bezel should be sitting flush to the top. Again, if that is the case, this bezel is so small, it would never work. If you were to use this side, which is great, it's so tall, you're going to have a lot of scrap material because this is I don't even know, 8 millimeters worth of height on a bezel, which is a lot. It's over 1/4 inch, right? Let's measure that. Oh, this is 9 millimeters. Okay, so that's like over 1/4 inch, and we're heading towards that 1/2 inch mark, which is a lot for a bezel. So you're going to have a lot of waste if you use the shim as shown. Ooh, that's a good one. Shim as shown. Okay, so there it is. How did I use this incorrectly? Well, again, I'll show you. So if you were to use this, you do need to put this in, right? Close it up. I know my bezel wire is not exactly flat, but we're from cutting, but we'll go with it, okay? Okay, so you were supposed to have this flush, and then you just keep sawing all the way through to the grooves. Okay, so I think that makes sense for you guys. Then the next thing is, how do you score this? So to score this, you would open this up, and you would leave the shim in there, or else this is going to fall through. And you put this bezel in, you tighten it up like so. Again, you put this in your vise, which you can do it without putting it in the vise, but I think you'd want to. And then you would run your saw blade through to score it. I'm like, it's, and I don't know, it seems to be okay, but I think I would just sit here and just score it. Okay, so in the end, they both have some issues, but I believe that the more practical one is going to be the one by Jim Brandvik, okay, which is this one. So I have a comment out there that you're not supposed to use the shims to cut the grooves, you're supposed to use the shims to score it. However, I would argue that too. Perhaps that's what the instructions said, but the problem with it is there is no groove inside. Unlike Jim's, you see there's a groove inside to hold it in place so that it doesn't fall through. So I think if you're going to use this, it would be best to have the shim in there so that this has something to sit on. Because if it doesn't have something to sit on, there's no grooves in here to hold it in place. So you're holding it by tension. I don't know about you, but it's seeming like you're asking for it. Okay, so let's move on. Let's try something a little bit more fun. Okay, so then comes Robert's idea. So because Robert is a tool maker, and he's, he was sitting around watching this going, oh, I can make a better mouse trap. And what's funny is, again, he and I sort of came to that same conclusion. What he came up with was, you can make your own. Why not? And although I went ahead and put this in because you guys don't want to sit here watching me putting this in, it's like watching paint dry. It was not fun doing this, but I'm going to test it here in a second to see whether or not it works. I'm going to grab a piece of paper here so you can see this. Okay, you see that? So his suggestion was to go get a couple washers and put them in here, okay? And that's going to serve as your divide. These are saw blades. One facing up towards me, and, well, his suggestion, and I'm modifying his suggestion, okay? His suggestion was having one with the teeth going down and one with the teeth going in the opposite direction so that it only cuts in one direction. My suggestion is that you have one facing up and one facing down. Then it definitely only cuts in one direction. And the reason for the two teeth is we're going to cut the groove, and we're going to, not the two teeth, the two saw blades. We're going to cut the groove and use the saw blade as our marker, so that as our supposed jig, right? So that we can cut evenly every time. Another thing he came up with too, which I thought was really interesting, which I haven't figured out how I would do it, but he was thinking about making it. So maybe if you guys reach out to him, if you're making these things, have him make it for you. But that said, another thing he came up with too is as you're sawing, these blades, they sort of could move apart a little bit, and they're not exact because the blades are so flexible and so thin, is to put something in here in between the blades to ensure that they don't wiggle, because there is some wiggle room, okay? But as I'm thinking about that out loud, there might be wiggle room in those blades, but what if you cut the blades shorter? Then it becomes more rigid, right? So there would be a lot less wiggle than if you were to use the entire length of a 6-inch blade. I don't know, we're gonna find out here in a second. Remember, it's all one big experiment. Okay, so I'm gonna grab some cut lube out because we do want to make sure that we are well lubricated. Okay, and I'll show you my washers. I actually made my washers this morning, so I'll show you my washers and I'll take this apart here when we're done. Oops. Okay, so again, I'm going to mention typically you would score this and so that you know where you're sawing if you're doing it without a jig. But I'm also going to really quickly here score a line for how deep I want the castellations to go so that I can actually do this a little bit more accurately, but that's what you would do. And then typically you would score it like so, and then you would know, or take out a ruler and use a marker and mark all of that. Okay, I'm gonna put this in my vise here. Let me me a second. Let's switch cameras. Okay. So the score mark is actually facing me because I'm the one who needs to see it, not necessarily you right now. But, okay, I'm going to turn this a little bit more like that. Easier for myself. So apparently some of you have a lot of broken blades in your studio. Cutting it is not necessary, huh? I guess I didn't even think about going through my broken blades. Anyway, okay, so let's see which one's the one that's cutting. Okay, it's going to be my right one is the one that cuts. So I'm just going to put this in here and let's see if this works. Ah! I'm doing it backwards. I need to do it. I have to think about this. Okay. Yep, I'm doing it backwards. I need to do it on this side. Okay. So we're going to start here. And notice my outside blade is to the outside of the bezel. My first mark. Ooh, and it loosened up. Okay. Why are you loose? So let me see if I can tighten that up. So I guess you can call this a hack. Okay. All right, so now the second blade, and that blade on the left side here is my marker. It goes into that first groove. And I think he's on to something here. Now, if only Q can saw straight. Okay, but I don't know why my blade won't stay tight because it loosened up again. Now, he was using a much fancier saw than I am. I'm just using a standard German saw blade, saw frame, nothing fancy. So yours might work a little bit better. If you have one of those fancy ones, it might clamp a little bit better. But I do like this idea. The concept is there. It's probably me. And if only I can saw straight too, right? That would be helpful. It would help also if if my saw blades could be a little bit more even, that would also be helpful. Okay. And yes, you're supposed to count. They say you're supposed to count your strokes. Yeah, good luck with that because every stroke is a little bit different in length. That's not going to work for me. I can tell you that right now. I'm sorry, say that again. So the comment was, is this a hacksaw? That would be correct. It's a hacksaw. Okay. You know what? This isn't bad. This is not bad. I am not too adverse to this. Can you see that? It's fairly even. Actually, you can see it better if I did it that way. It is fairly even. It's just not even on the bottom side because I can't see today or any day. But as far as the width, for the most part, it is even. I know like this one is not as even as the other ones, but I think this takes it's going to take a little bit more practice to understand what it is I'm doing. you know, and I'm looking at my blades here too, and it looks like it's more divided, like wider down here than it is at the top. But I'm not, this doesn't make me mad. Especially since it really didn't cost me anything to make. I don't know why I'm still doing this. I think it makes me happy to just saw and to see if this works. Okay, yeah, so what's interesting is as I'm doing this, I'm finding, okay, do you see what I'm doing? I'm actually pushing that left saw blade into the groove. That's what the finger is doing there. And it's helping, it's being my guide. That's the word I was looking for. It is being my guide. And it's helping me figure out where to put my saw blade down. Okay. Try a 3-inch saw. This is a 3-inch saw. So the comment is, oh, I think what you're saying is try a 3-inch saw blade. Yeah. Okay. So okay, so I'm going to come back to the question in a second, but I want to show you this. As you can see, the more I did it, the more even this became. It's practice. So that's what copper is for. So the question is, why did I put the saw blades in two different directions? Why not put it in the same direction and get two cuts out of it at the same time? So the reason for that, okay, hold on, let me move this out of my way. I have a vise in front of me and it's like really bugging me. Oh, come on. Okay, so the reason for that, if you had the blades both facing the same way and you're doing the cuts, that means that, oh, how do I put this? All right, so if we do two cuts at the same time, that means when you skip over, you're going to have to estimate the next two cuts. You wouldn't put the blade into the first cut. So the second blade is actually acting as a guide so that you know how far apart to go. Did that make sense? Let me know if that makes sense. But that's why you would put the blade in, or that's the point of the second blade, was to act as a guide. The second blade really was not acting as a cutter or as a saw, right? And that's why I also turned it upside down, because I didn't want any risk of that second blade making any kind of cuts, because knowing me, I would probably cut it even further than where I wanted it to be. But as I'm looking at this, I'm actually really liking this concept. You can totally see how much more even I've gotten from the first one to the second, from the first round of cuts to the second round of cuts, meaning the spacing is a lot better. Again, it's just practice. Additionally, you can see my first couple of cuts are sort of at an angle. Well, you know, I'm learning, and now I'm cutting a lot straighter. Yep. So what's your thought there? Okay, Andy just walked away from the computer, so even if you put up thoughts, I can hear them. It's not going to help. Anyway, so that said, that is the hack. Okay, so I'm going to pull out the camera here, and I'm going to show you how I did this. Okay, so in here, this was just really difficult. I'm going to take them both out. And it could be my washers too. Maybe my washers were not as exact as all that. So I actually cut these washers to fit my my thumb screw on my saw blade. So these were just done with some 18 gauge copper, because I really didn't want to push my luck with 16 gauge sheet. So 18 gauge is about as much as I'm gonna try to cut on my Ikohi disc cutter, right? By the way, that's available at theurbanbeater.com. Just saying. Okay, so I cut these, and then I have two more up here. Now, of course, if you wanted the castellations to be a lot thinner in spacing, you would only use one washer. It's a little, I don't know, maybe it's a little tight for me. But that said, then I put these back on, like so. Okay. So, by the way, if you have any comments, Andy had to step away and I don't see your comments. So, I think the puppy is throwing up upstairs. I think that's what he said. Okay, so now I'm going to squeeze the first blade in on the far left side, in between my saw and the first washer. And you're going to see why this is so like peculiar here in a second. And then the second one, I'm facing downward. This saw blade is facing upward. Second one I'm going to face downward, and you can see where I'm going to struggle, but I didn't do it with a pair of tweezers. Maybe tweezers will help here. Of course, this doesn't help. We grab a different pair of tweezers. Maybe that will help. Yes, it's a little cumbersome with the fingers. Okay, we'll put it there and see if we can lay it right. Nope. And this is why I didn't do this in the beginning, because this is just painful. And then I just knocked the first one out. You see that? First one just got knocked out. Here's... Anyway. Okay. So I have, by the way, this morning, extended an invitation to Robert to maybe do a guest spot here in the next few weeks of how to do a castellated bezel, because see, he had mentioned that he does his after he has formed the bezel, then he makes the castellations. Then that's when he cuts it. But you know, my problem with that is when you make a castellated bezel, you would use either 20 or 18 gauge. Okay. And that is the consensus. And part of the reason why the reason why is you're trying to make something a little bit more heavy. It's a look, it's a bit more masculine. And so that's why you want to go with a heavier bezel. But by putting the castellations in there, it helps you bend the bezel. Without it, it becomes really, really difficult to bend. And so I'm curious to see how the heck he bends it. Now I can tell you though too, it is a lot easier to make just an oval bezel versus say a one with a free-form shape in a castellated. But then that's why you don't see, or at least I haven't seen any, if much of any, castellated bezels with a free-form shape. So you usually see it with like ovals and rounds, right? Okay, so as you can see, actually I couldn't get the saw blade into the far left. It's actually in between, but you can see now that because I used it in between the washers, it has the width is a lot thinner. So you can keep adding more washers if you want the width to go wider, but if you want it to go thinner, then you would do it with just a single washer. But your limitation is going to be in this nut, okay, or this screw. The screw can only accommodate so much before it doesn't have enough length to catch on the other side. But I suppose you can go to the hardware store and buy a thumb screw that has a lot more depth to it so that you can make these things wider. The easiest way to go about this is to take this to the hardware store and get a washer that fits. You know, I forgot all about that this morning. I assumed I had a washer here that was big enough, but I didn't, and that's why I made my own. Okay, Andy, are you back? I don't think he's back. So hold on a second. I'm going to see if I can log on and take a look at your comments myself. See, assuming that there are any comments out there at all. Who knows? But I hope you guys learned a little something and are finding this a little bit interesting. put some cross hatches. Okay, so, oh, he's back. Okay, it's a bezel Sherpa. Okay, but then could two up. Okay, put some cross hatches into the watches to help grip the blade. Cross hatches into the watches. Okay, so there was a comment by Deb. Deb, can you please explain? Put some cross hatches into the washers to help grip the blade. Okay, so the comment was to put some cross hatches into, that's not a bad idea. What she means is if you take out the washer, and I suppose you can do this with a file, like a little needle file, and again, just score some cross hatches in there so that it grips the blade. Not a bad idea, but another thing you could do too. What about a rubber washer? I wonder if that would help grip it too. Actually, it's probably not a bad idea. I wonder if I have a rubber washer out here somewhere. I know that I have some O-rings in here, but maybe an O-ring would also help. Okay, so any other comments, Andy? Okay, so, but those are some really good ideas. It's a little bit of a work in progress. The final word on this. Okay, no, I'm not going to finish this project. I had intended on making the whole bezel thing, but I am done. Let me just say I'm done, because you know what? I screwed up my silver piece and I'm really not in the mood to finish it up. I'm not in the mood to get a new one. Okay, just saying. Now, so that's one. Two, there is merit in both of these tools. If I was to choose a tool, I actually like Jim Brandvik's better. Okay. The bezel ease can be found on Peppy Tools. Jim Brandvik's can be found on Etsy. But my number one would actually be the saw, the hack saw. We're going to call it Robert Lopez's hack saw. And I would also probably do this again and go back to and cut it to that 3-inch blade to give it a little bit more leverage, so that it wasn't so bendy every time I went to saw it. And also, to Deb's comment and suggestion is maybe put some hashes into your washer, or if you have a piece of rubber or something that you can put in there in between to help hold it in. I don't think that's a bad idea either. And these can be done really inexpensively. You go to the hardware store, you buy something like this, it's like 15 cents. And why not try a couple different ones? And I'm pretty sure you can buy even the rubber or the foamy. I'm thinking foam, the foamy washers from the hardware store. At least I assume they have the foamy ones at the hardware store. I thought I saw them there. Anyway, so that said, I hope you guys learned a little something. If you have any suggestions, do send them out. I believe next week for Monday we're gonna do the we're gonna try something else new. I haven't decided what it is yet. I think it's gonna be spoon rings. I can't remember, but just something completely different that I've never done before. Probably will never do again. Oh, I know. We started with Stone and Stone, said I'd never do it again, and apparently now I'm teaching it. And now we're doing Castellated Bezel, which really, I think me never doing this again will probably be a year before I reapproach this, and then we'll try spoon rings. If you didn't see on my Facebook, I did post that I'm doing a pendant called the Solidarity Pendant, and that is to help support Ukraine for virtually ever crafting. This one was done in copper, and you can see there's the two Ukraine colors in there. We're going to make a donation to help the cause in Ukraine, to help the humanitarian needs over there. So if you haven't signed up for it, it's still available. Teachers are sending out kits for virtually ever crafting now. Some of them did send early, so some of you will receive it a little bit early, but most of them are going out today. If you haven't had an opportunity to register for virtually ever crafting yet, you still can at virtuallyevercrafting.com, especially if you want your kits by next week. Oh my gosh, yes, I know. It's been 6 months. Next week will be 6 months since the last virtually ever crafting. Time is flying and it's absolutely crazy. Anyway, thank you so much for swinging in and going through that with me and your suggestions. It was a lot of fun learning about castellated bezels. It was a lot of fun for me. Hopefully you guys learned a little something along the way. And if you do use any of these processes, do share your pictures with me. Post it on our Facebook so we can see where you are. Maybe you got something out of this. It would be really interesting to see if anybody takes this on and gives it a try. We'd love to know how it worked out, and I'm sure Robert would be too. I'll let you know if Robert's going to come on and be a guest instructor. That'll be really interesting. But if you do know him, by the way, tag him. Tell him to come do this. It'll be great. All right, so I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. It's Monday. It's a great start of the week for me. Hopefully it is for you too. I'll be back on Wednesday with the crazy UFO, the ring. We're going to finish up this ring on Wednesday, and on Friday we will have a Zoom along because we're all just getting ready for virtual ever crafting and we need sort of a break for our heads anyway. I'll post that link sometime this week before Friday. All right, have a great week, everyone. We'll see you